समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
3 days of skirmishes with Pakistan have brought focus on a country that we don't think about very much. That is Turkey, or Turkey now, as it's been given a new spelling. New spelling because there is a return to native culture or native idea of nationalism in many ways. Native idea of nationalism and also Islamism. That is under Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the strongman of Turkey. He is at the center of this cast of magnificent strongmen of the nationalist right. Now, all of them are strongmen of the nationalist right. There's no woman, by the way, no woman runs a government like that, a dictatorial government like that, only men. In his case, he is also a strongman of the religious nationalist right, because he's used religion in his politics as no Turkish politician had done in the past. As we know, after the First World War, when the caliphate ended, after that Turkey chose secularism, and that is when Turkey really grew and boomed. Its social indicators became among the best in Asia. Its income levels became the best in Asia, among the best in Asia. This part of Asia, I'm not going to Japan and East Asia. It also became technologically very powerful. It became a member of NATO. It remains a member of NATO, although just a tiny part of its geography falls in Europe. That is just across the Strait of Bosporus. So it became a genuine Eurasian power. That is what Kemal Atatürk did. And Kemal Atatürk, although he was a secular leader, there is no Islamic country in the world, including Pakistan, particularly Pakistan, where many landmarks are not named after him. In Pakistan, in fact, there will be something named after Kemal Atatürk almost everywhere. Even in New Delhi, in the Chanakyapuri area, diplomatic area, enclave, we have a major avenue named after Kemal Atatürk. In fact, Kemal Atatürk was General Musharraf's role model. So just think about it. Think of the change Pakistan has gone through, from having one dictator whose role model was a modernizer, secular modernizer like Kemal Atatürk, and now you have the army chief who's the monarch of all his surveys, and also the guy is put in jail, Imran Khan. Both of them have the same common ideal, which is Riyasat-e-Madina, which is the exact opposite of the conception of Atatürk. Erdogan came, he inherited all of this, he just changed one thing, that is secularism, and he took the country back to Islamism, and that's been keeping him in power, and he's been winning again and again and again. That is the Turkey now, which has emerged as one of the key allies of Pakistan. When did it start? This had been going on since the 1950s, and I will tell you about it as we go along. India and Turkey had signed many agreements. Turkey had important visits to India, so it looked like Turkey and India also had a level relationship, even though there was an old history of a special relationship between Turkey and Pakistan. However, once India changed the status of Kashmir in 2019, after the elections on 5th of August 2019, India changed the status of Kashmir. Pakistan was furious, as you would expect. Imran Khan went and spoke at the UN General Assembly. It was a rant, a very angry address. That was no surprise. You would expect that from Imran Khan. This surprise, however, was compounded by two more leaders speaking sort of in the same language, or at least fully endorsing Imran Khan's view on Kashmir. These two leaders were Mahathir Mohamad of Malaysia, who's gone. He was already in his 90s, and Mahathir will always be Mahathir. So it was dismissed a little bit like that. And Malaysia and India have a different kind of relationship. But the other one was Erdogan. Now, Mahathir is gone, and since then, Malaysia has gotten off that curve. In fact, Anwar Ibrahim, the current leader of Malaysia, was in India just the other day, just a few months back, and you could see that relationship is completely changed. The Mahathir effect has been completely detoxified. Not with Turkey. With Turkey, it's become worse as time has passed. Even though Imran Khan is in jail, it doesn't matter. Turkey has now plonked itself firmly on the side of Pakistan. Turkey has also become one of Pakistan's major arms suppliers, and it has moved into the space that was created by the stoppage of American arms supplies or American sanctions in a way which have not been fully lifted. For example, I will take you through the details of this. When the Americans put sanctions on Pakistani F-16s, which they had got as part of American aid packages. One day I will tell you about those aid packages. Each one was called Peace Project, this Peace Project, that's Americans have a sense of humor. So under each package, they were given a bunch of F-16s. Some of those have become old because the first F-16s had come in the late 80s. Some of those have become old, and they needed a midlife upgrade because the Americans were not willing to do it. It's the Turks who did that because Turks use a large fleet of F-16s of various kinds and have facilities and expertise to renovate them, to repair them as members of NATO. So that is Turkey. Now you've heard Turkey's name a lot lately because some of the drones the Pakistanis used, the Akinci drone, the Bayraktar, they didn't use Bayraktars, but they have Bayraktars, or the Yeha drone, pieces of which have been found on the Indian side. All of these are Turkish drones. We also saw a Turkish naval ship, a corvette. It's an anti-submarine warfare corvette. TCG Buyukuda, if I pronounce it right, which came and parked itself at Karachi Harbour, as if to say, if Indian Navy is coming to do something with Karachi, I am at least standing here. Be careful, something might hit me, even in error. That seemed like it was made to look like a routine visit because the ship was coming back from Malaysia, etc. But the intent was well known. Also, during this short conflict, cargo aircraft from Turkey landed in Pakistan. Also, Turkey made many statements. It made initial statements which were boilerplate statements condemning the terror attack, etc. In every statement, they also say that Pakistan and India should cooperate, including over counter-terrorism. But once trouble started, then their tone changed. Then the tone became very pro-Pakistan. So along with China, even China was more restrained. Turkey wasn't so restrained. So Turkey was fully supporting Pakistan, and even during the conflict, just before the conflict, in fact, after the Pahalgam massacre, Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif had met Erdogan, and both had issued the same statements of brotherhood, etc., etc. So because the Pakistanis knew that there will be a payback from India, because that is the new normal. I'm so sorry to use that Ghisapeta word now, but that is Pakistanis knew that there will be a strike from the Indian side. So they needed support, and that's the reason Shehbaz Sharif had met Erdogan and got the full support. It is all of this that has made Indian public opinion very angry. And that's the reason among the first steps Government of India has now taken is to withdraw the security clearance given to a Turkish company, Celebi, Celebi. Turkish words are difficult to pronounce because you don't know when C will be C, like an Incirlik air base which stores 50 bombs to be dropped by fighter aircraft. And these are the B-61 bombs. The Americans have stored them there as a kind of NATO stores there. And at the same time, Erdogan also keeps hassling with the Americans all the time. In fact, he had particularly bad relations when Democrats were in power. He's trying to fix that now with Trump. That said, Celebi's security clearance has now been withdrawn. It's a very large Turkish company. It has an Indian principal, an Indian partner, and we will see what will happen. Similarly, in 2024, things were going all right between Turkey and India until for a long time, in fact. In 2024, suddenly everybody realized that while the larger relationship was going south because Erdogan was going on and on and on, sort of siding with Pakistan, that Hindustan Shipyard Limited at Vizag, which had earlier signed an agreement with a Turkish company to make 5 fleet support ships. These are not fighting ships, these are fleet support ships that take fuel, water, food, etc. to your Navy vessels, which may be far out in the oceans, right? You are a blue water Navy, you will need fleet support ships. So 5 fleet support ships were to be built in India in a joint venture with a Turkish firm. Hindustan Shipyard Limited cancelled that in April. Then in July, there was no formal statement. In July, a story emerged in the process of a Turkish parliamentary committee meeting where a top official said that, look, India is a big buyer. It is among the largest importers of arms in the world. It's a very good market for us. I mean, it was hyperbole there. He said India buys arms worth 100 billion. All of India's defense budget at that point was just about $70 billion. So, exaggeration goes on, but India is a large buyer and it was a lucrative market for India. But he said, we can't sell anything to India now because of our special relationship with Pakistan and India's hostile ties with Pakistan. Indian MEA spokesperson, on the other hand, called the story of that banned disinformation. He said, as far as I know, the story is not good. I have no information. You can go and check with the Turkish embassy. That's what he said, but everybody knows that both countries now have a kind of relationship where it's difficult that at least they'll be buying and selling weapons to each other or jointly producing anything. In fact, at this point, it's impossible for Turkey and India to have an armament relationship. At the same time, many countries have these differences but carry on with trade and other relationships. And a prime example of that actually is Turkey. It's a country that supports Muslim Brotherhood, supports and finances Muslim Brotherhood, right? At the same time, it recognizes Israel. It allowed Israel to have an embassy in Turkey and vice versa. At the same time, now Erdogan seems to be leading the charge against Israel, asking for delegitimization of Israel. So there is a Turk way of conducting diplomacy, which goes back maybe 500, 600 years since the rise of the Ottoman power. In fact, longer than that. And they've been a globalized power. And that's why Turkey itself has a globalized mindset. They don't look at themselves as just a territorial power. They look at themselves as a globalized ideological power. So on the one hand, they can be members of NATO. On the other hand, they want to be the biggest leaders in the Islamic world. They compete with the Iranians on the one hand and Saudi Arabia and Egypt on the other. So with Egypt and Iran, I will leave Iraq aside because that is still smaller in population. With Egypt and Iran and then say Sudan, these represent, and Nigeria then, but these mostly, if you stay in this neighborhood, the Middle East neighborhood, Egypt, Turkey and Iran have the 3 largest populations. And that is where the competition lies. So Iran's competition comes from ideology because Iran, promotes and believes in very strong version of Islam. Iran also brings in a very strong element of Shia culture and ideology. And Iran also sells this product to the Islamic world because of its anti-Americanism and anti-Westernism. It wants to be seen, and it is the only large Islamic country standing in hostility to America, which Egyptians don't do, they depend on America. Turks don't do, they depend on America. And the Gulf Arabs don't do. In any case, you've just seen the bonhomie between Mohammed bin Salman and Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump fantasizes that he could be a king like Mohammed bin Salman. So tomorrow his son will also become the ruler of America. Jokes apart, If I start listing the complexities of Turkey, they are so fascinating, and I'm a storyteller that I can go on. It will take an hour and a half, and yet I will have more to tell you. So let me try and also parse it to what is relevant right now. I told you how Turkey can balance contradictions. So it's a member of NATO which ordered S-400 missiles from Russia, just as India did around the same time. It received deliveries of a bunch of batteries. India ordered 5 batteries. India has only got 3 so far because then the war in Ukraine came and Russia didn't have any batteries to spare. Plus, Russia lost some in combat with Ukraine because Ukrainians used their long-range missiles and also their long-range drones to target some of them. So Russians themselves are short of batteries right now, but some of those batteries are sitting in Turkey. Turkey bought those batteries, even though they are members of NATO, they have NATO protection. It's a treaty protection. Under Article 5 of the NATO treaty, if any NATO member is attacked, it's like every member having been attacked. So all members have to come to that country's aid. In spite of that, because Turkey also wants an element of autonomy, and they had the money at that point, they bought a bunch of S-400 batteries. When that happened, they were hit by CATSA sanctions. Under CATSA sanctions, the US stopped any military sales to them, particularly the supply of F-35 stealth aircraft, where this had gone to a stage where Turkey had already paid for a bunch of F-35s. 6 had been constructed, 6 have been built, and they are now warehoused. Their warehouse is Turkey's aircraft Turkey has paid for, but America blocked them. These sanctions came in after Russia's occupation and then annexation of Crimea, which was a part of Ukraine. That is the history. So he bought these missiles, and then again, because Turkey is Turkey, he bought these missiles but has not operationalized them. So just as the Americans have his F-35s warehoused, he has these missiles warehoused. And at one point of time, we saw a senior Turkish businessman and a former minister, in fact, saying that, look, you can do something with these missiles. You can get rid of these missiles. It will solve many problems for you. You will get your money back that you paid the Russians for these missiles, and your sanctions will be lifted by the Americans. And what do you do with these missiles? You don't destroy them or throw them in the Bosphorus. He said you can sell them to anybody who wants them. You can give them back to Russia. Russia needs them. You can sell them to India because India wants them. And you know what? You can sell them to Pakistan. I don't know. I think the final chapter on the Turkish S-400 story is yet to be written, and that story needs watching. That is how capable Turkey is of managing these contradictions. Within that situation, it has now run into this Indian pushback. India has something to lose with its relationship going south with Turkey. Turkey is among the not many nations with which India has a multi-billion-dollar trade surplus. In fact, until 23, the trade surplus was almost $3.5 billion. India's exports, you will see the chart on your screens. India's exports were in the $9.5 billion ballpark. The next year, as the relationship worsened, India's exports have fallen by $3 billion, as have imports. So the trade between the two countries has declined. That is something that India has to lose if this relationship with Turkey continues to worsen. Turkey has now emerged as among the larger armament exporters in the world. And they are not just exporting ammunition, spare parts, etc. They are now exporting systems. And the biggest export from Turkey, the most notable export is the Bayraktar drones, which got their brand value from how effective they were against the Russians in that war. And Russians are his pals, right? Putin is his pal. He is now getting the Russians and Ukrainians to come into Istanbul to have their negotiation while he sells Bayraktar drones to Ukrainians. See, however, what he's been doing with Pakistan. His total defense exports in 2024, his total defense exports were $7.15 billion, which was an increase of 29% over the previous year. That was $5.5 billion. I suspect a lot of it has come from drones. How much of it is accounted for by the Pakistanis? I would say at this point, Pakistan's defense purchases, military purchases from Turkey are in the ballpark of $1.5 billion. $1.5 billion, you might say, in India doesn't look like a lot of money, but think about it. That's almost precisely the amount of money that Pakistan has just got from IMF by way of a bailout. Pakistan, in fact, wasn't among the top 3 arms importers from Turkey until 2 years back. The top 3 were UAE, Qatar, the usual suspect. I don't know what they buy all these arms for, and Oman. Now Pakistan has become number 2. At this point, UAE is the largest importer of defense equipment from Turkey, accounting for 18%, almost 1/5 of all of Turkey's arms exports. Pakistan now comes at number 2 at 10%. And then there is Qatar at 9.9%, just a little behind Pakistan. And then Azerbaijan is catching up. You know, Azerbaijan defeated Armenia mainly because of the weapons, especially the drones that they got from Turkey. So Turkey doesn't give any of this to anybody for free. It's a business. At the same time, Turks have no love lost for Armenians. Turks carried out among the greatest genocides or massacres of the 20th century was the Turks exterminating Armenians at an industrial scale, for which they haven't yet said sorry. And they saw also Azerbaijan fighting the Armenians, so I'm sure they would have had some special delight selling these weapons to Azerbaijanis so they could make money and also see them destroy the Armenians in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict that we have spoken about multiple times on Cut the Clutter. We'll share the link for one of those episodes with you. 1951, that is within 4 years of Pakistan's formation, 1951, Turkey and Pakistan signed the Treaty of Eternal Friendship, which then dovetailed nicely into the new allegedly or supposedly anti-communist alliances that the Americans built in Asia. So first of all was the Baghdad Pact in 1955. Then 1959, when Iraq pulled out of Baghdad Pact, because we know that Iraq took a turn to the other side, because Iraq then became, in the course of time, a Ba'athist country, like a left-of-center country. When Iraq pulled out, what used to be Baghdad Pact now became CENTO, that is Central Treaty Organization. Pakistan and Turkey remained members of that. Also, in 1954, Pakistan became a member of SEATO, which was Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. Although geographically, Pakistan was not part of Southeast Asia, this SEATO was headquartered in Bangkok, yet Pakistan joined it because you know what? Pakistan had chosen very early on that the way to define themselves was that they were not India. And the way to define themselves was to say that India is not a legitimate entity as it exists, like a secular multicultural country, and there was to be an eternal competition, if not war, with India. So Pakistan, as a smaller country, needed allies. And what better ally than the Americans and the entire Western world? So Pakistan joined SEATO as well. There was disillusionment in the 60s because the Americans did not come to Pakistan's aid in the 65 war, and then 71 war. They made some noises. They used abusive words about Indira Gandhi, etc. But they also threatened to send this 7th Fleet. But I suspect the deal there was that as long as you do what you're doing on the eastern side of Pakistan, that is East Pakistan, which became Bangladesh, it's okay. But if you try then to destroy West Pakistan, that will be unacceptable to the Western power. But Pakistanis are not grateful for that. Pakistanis got very irritated. In the course of time, Pakistan pulled out of both of those alliances. And those alliances also died as the Cold War declined. Pakistan pulled out from those, but Pakistan-Turkey partnership, which was initially defined by this Treaty of Eternal Friendship, as it was called, that only thickened even after that. So much so that after 1965, when Americans put sanctions on Pakistan, Pakistan's sole submarine, that was PNS Ghazi, which was the old US Navy Tench class. It was the first submarine in the subcontinent. India got its submarines from Soviet Union in the late 60s. That submarine had become really old. It needed a retrofit. That was done by a Turkish company. So this is really an old relationship. We need to keep that perspective in mind. Then look at the list of what's going on right now. So F-16 modernization, I told you earlier, Turkish Aerospace Industries and Pak Ministry of Defense in 2009 signed a contract for $75 million to do midlife upgrades for 41 F-16s and also for pilot training on these upgraded aircraft. Then there was also the purchase of electronic warfare test and training range in Pakistan for Pakistan Air Force with a company called Havelsan plus Pakistan Air Force. Then with a company called STM, that's a shipbuilding company, Pakistan signed a deal for making $80 million deal to make fleet tankers for its navy. This was to be done in joint venture with Karachi shipyards. Then remember Pakistan's submarines. Pakistan's submarines are French. That is Augusta 90B. France has stopped selling arms to Pakistan and renovating what it has sold already, or anything to help Pakistan with French systems, existing French systems. Obviously, because France now has a much deeper and larger and much more lucrative relationship with India. So these Augusta submarines, 3 Augusta submarines were renovated again by the Turkish company STM. They are all being put through midlife upgrades. One has come back already. So first of these Augusta submarines, after their midlife retrofit, came in 2021, that is PNS Hamza. The second came in 2023, that is PNS Khalid. All their new sonar systems, periscopes, command and control, C2 as it's called, data distribution, very vital these days, steering control, cooling, radar, all of that was renovated. In addition, Pakistan also bought targeting pods. Targeting pods were also bought. The first contract was for 25 billion, the second again for $24.9 billion. These targeting pods were for Pakistani JF-17 aircraft, which they are building in partnership or joint venture with the Chinese. And Pakistanis also started selling some of their trainer aircraft. Pakistanis have a trainer aircraft called Mushak, which now has a version called Super Mushak. So they contracted to sell 52 of those to Turkey, which 3 were supplied, and then COVID came. More supplies supposedly will begin now. Another significant contract, armament contract between Pakistan and Turkey was for corvettes. Maybe a similar kind of ship that came into Karachi harbor just now from Turkish Navy. These are MILGEM, MILGEM, that's the abbreviation for the company's name. Corvettes. Corvettes are not very large warships, but significant warships with anti-submarine warfare, etc., technologies, and also weaponry. This was a $1.5 billion contract for 4 corvettes. 2 were to be manufactured in Turkey and 2 to be manufactured jointly at Karachi shipyard. So this in a way is the second generation or second avatar of PNS Babar in Pakistan Navy. More will come in as years pass now, quite quickly I suspect. There is also an order for T-129 attack helicopters. T-129 attack helicopters, these are tactical reconnaissance and attack helicopters, not heavy, but sort of medium scale. But this is also a $1.5 billion order, 30 attack helicopters. And this order is with Turkish Aerospace Industries. This is held up, however. These helicopters have not been delivered because following the CATSA sanctions, Americans stopped the supply to Turkey of their LHTEC engines. These engines power these helicopters. So until Americans reopen the delivery of these engines to Turkey, Turkey cannot deliver these helicopters to Pakistan. Bayraktar, we've talked about enough. First 3 Bayraktar drones were delivered in 2022. More have come in after that. We don't know precisely how many, but that's an ongoing program. In fact, there is also discussions to jointly produce Bayraktar drones in Pakistan. There is a large project for UAV upgradation. That's Pakistan's National Engineering and Science Commission, NESCOM, and Turkish Aerospace Industries, or TUSAS, have signed. And this is for developing long endurance drones. Drones, as we know, the longer endurance drones are in two categories, MALE and HALE, that is medium altitude, long endurance, and high altitude, long endurance. So this is long endurance, doesn't tell me what altitude, maybe that will remain flexible. At the same time, Pakistan's buying from this company Ankara UAVs. UAVs are heavy. They can carry 200 kilograms of warlord, which can include the lighter version of air to surface missiles, a very potent weapon. Drone research, the two countries have set up a joint venture, that is National Aerospace Science and Tech Park, and NASTP. That's a very controversial project in Pakistan that we'll talk about later. This is in partnership with Baykar, which makes Bayraktar drones. And then the flagship of this entire partnership is the Khan National Combat Aircraft Project. That is after the Americans said no to F-35s and Americans said no to more fighter aircraft to the Turks. They got concerned and they wanted more buyers to come in to give them economies of scale, and that's where Pakistan and Turkey came together to develop what is called as Khan National Combat Aircraft Project. So if you see all of this, we can go on and on. If you see all of this, you will know that Pakistan and Turkey now are joined at the hip. They have a very strong, forget the fact that they have an ideological relationship, they also have a very strong military and trade relationship. And India, in this case, becomes a joint target. For Pakistan, it's a direct target. For Turkey, it becomes a target vicariously. And that is what the Indian public opinion and government of India are now responding to.